Okay. And we are live. We have no one on yet, but we're live. Okay, so I'm going to go to okay. I gotta stop that. Okay. It looks like it's a few minutes delay or a few seconds delayed. So I'm just going to put in the chat. We are here. Looking forward to talking to you.
So my five-year-old grandson is here today, as he's been quite a bit in the last 2 weeks. So he's been trained, ideally, that when the door is closed, it means he doesn't come into Grampy's office. But we'll see if it works.
Yeah, that's always a challenge.
Yeah.
I will say last week when I when I did this, I had sent out a reminder a day before, and I sent out a reminder 10 minutes before in an email. Well, I was supposed to do it 10 minutes before, but it ended up going out at 12:45 a.m. rather than 12:45 p.m. And so I lost a few people off my list from that one, but I'm not sure that it's might be the same fact that they are either not reminded or coming in a little bit late.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't think that long lunches out with colleagues are a thing going on right now in most places, but it was interesting to look at the list of states yesterday that came out, which states are when are various quarantine stay-at-home things supposed to end. Virginia is out to June 10th.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I mean when they went at it, they went at it big. So
okay. I would expect that the coasts are going to be a little bit further stretched out than the Midwest, I hope.
mm-hmm. Now, when people joined in last week, did they join in on camera?
No, they joined in via chat. And so I've got a chat window open. I'll share my screen with you. I've got this chat window open on from YouTube.
Oh, gotcha.
If I go to YouTube, you can actually see it's a couple of seconds delayed here, but you can see that we're on there. And so by having this chat window up, people start chatting, I can kind of see them. And usually there's icons. So like Ed Smith from Williamson was here, and Gary Trebek was here from Colorado, and the folks from Purdue. And so I can see them named when they come on and start chatting, but it just takes a second.
Right. Yeah, I was talking with Mike Quinn who's at Rockford this morning, and he was planning to come in, and then he got ended up in a meeting scheduled during this window. So
yeah, it's the same with Brad from ENC. He was planning on coming in too. So I think we can go ahead and start, since we're going to record it and people can chat later about it. But I thought maybe we could at least get the conversation started to just what what both of us are seeing of the challenges right now. And I know you and I talked the other day about, there's the basics of blocking and tackling that we just can't put down and ignore during this time. What do you think about that? I mean, do you see very many schools that are just kind of trying to hunker down rather than actually do some additional work? And just, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think most people have adjusted, Bart. I talk sometimes about the three levels of planning. There was the immediate, we got to get students off campus and figure out how to do this online. And then there's this next phase of how's that going and what does it mean to lead a college, lead a team virtually, which is feels like an ever evolving thing. And then we're seeing some campuses that are saying, all right, so when this is over, and we know it will be over, when it's over, what do we need to be ready to do? So it's encouraging to see that, but it still feels like there's a lot of folks who are doing a really good job, I think, being really intentional about trying to engage students and prospective students right now, but not necessarily thinking about what comes next.
Right.
And for those who got money out of the COVID-19 stimulus package, there's the immediate decisions of, so what do we do with that money, especially the student refund part of it. And that feels like I don't pretend to be an expert with a hotline into the Department of Education, but it feels like there's almost daily unveiling of, oh, no, that's not what that is, or, oh, there's this too. So I think what we're advising schools to do in that regard is I wouldn't jump real quickly into distributing that money. One president said we went and used a military analogy and said, we want to keep some powder dry here. We might need it.
Yeah.
Because the thing, I mean, you think about this. Think about how many students typically work in the summer and save up money to help, maybe not to write a check to the college in the fall, but at least to make sure that they arrive with their books, pay the money for their books, and then, the clothes they're going to get and the new supplies and everything else. And some students will be without that, and you wouldn't want that to get in the way. So having some money to help people come back may be just as important too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I was talking to a president this week too, that he was sharing a study from McKinsey and Company that did a study of the Great Recession back in 2008 and 2009. And they studied banks at that time. And they looked at the banks who hunkered down and tried to ride it out and just kind of didn't do anything new and just hunkered down, versus the ones who said, you know what, this is a new time. We're going to scrap everything that we've done before, and we're going to try to pivot and make new hay out of whatever we've got. The ones who actually did the make new hay were a lot healthier at the end when it was all said and done, rather than the ones who just tried to ride it out and ride the storm out. So, that president called me with that analogy and said, so we need to do some things with our website. We need to do some things with, some collateral. And if I need to go to the bank to borrow some money, or I need to do some fundraising to do it, it's important enough for us to pivot and do something rather than just holding our breath and hunkering down.
Yeah, that's right. I was talking to a president yesterday, Bart. I reached back to get a copy of this.
Oh, yeah.
Our founding partner's book that came out about a year ago, I think, year and a half ago. And it was written at the time in pivot. The idea is that there are times in an institution's history where you can't tweak your way to thriving. You may have to actually take a pivot. And of course, Joanne didn't write it with a pandemic in mind.
No.
I do think this president was saying to me yesterday, I bought this beforehand, been reading it, so helpful, bought a bunch for our board of trustees, and we're all working through it now as a senior leadership team. He said, boy, is this even more poignant right now too, that word pivot that you described. How can we take advantage of this situation in the best sense of that word to come out of the other side as a stronger institution?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that so many times things that have been either put off, new initiatives, or even just cleaning up the admissions office, or cleaning up some processes, or, addressing the website. It's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with a consultant that's working with a lot of colleges, and it's Jim Barnes who at with ABHE working with the governing group, and he was doing some research on the schools that he was going to be calling and reaching out to, and he emailed Dave Metters, included me on it, and said, I'm just flabbergasted with how bad some of these websites are. And as I'm getting ready to talk to them about, pivoting and thriving and doing things that need to be done, this is the first opportunity that people have to get an impression of the school. And it's kind of like I've heard you talk about, the campus, walk, doing the tour, and you would never, knowingly just walk them through a field of weeds.
Right.
And so many times I think the websites end up to be that same type of thing.
Yeah, I did a webinar a couple weeks ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic, for ABAC on kind of the intersection where how do enrollment people and finance people intersect, and it was around the campus welcome experience. And one of the points I made at the beginning is exactly what you're talking about. So for those of you with online programs who are thinking, well, this doesn't apply to us. No, if I'm thinking about being an online student and I come to your website for the first time, that's my campus visit. So did it look like somebody was expecting me? Can I find what I need? How quickly? Do I get a sense of quality about all this? That's what that matters greatly in that setting too. So
yeah, and I've even said before too that a lot of times when, especially if the students don't know your school, even traditional undergrad and parents, but they have a pastor who says something, or they have a counselor at school that says, hey, consider this school, I think you'd be a good fit. Well, if they go to check it out and they are trying to authenticate what that person told them, and they find out, the person was like, oh, they have a tremendous good quality program and, a top notch, but they get there and the website is subpar and not very convincing, it's going to introduce a lot of negative doubts that we just can't afford to have during this time.
Yeah, that's right.
Or ever.
That reminds me of something else, Bart, that I think is relevant. I've heard people say this at Credo, but I also hear campuses saying, well, during this time that's sort of, people were imagining that this time when I can't travel and students are off campus, that I would have all this downtime where I'll have a chance to think and reflect and so on. And I'm hearing quite a few people saying, I'm still looking for that downtime.
Yeah.
And so I think there's been an adjustment period to get to what this new, hopefully temporary reality is, new normal is like. People are adjusting to that and then figuring out their rhythm. But my hope, to your point, my hope would be that one of the things that people would use this time for is, from our research with admitted students and their parents, one of the most critical areas of the website that is often lacking, so let's say it that way, is the faculty profiles.
Yeah.
Our research makes it abundantly clear that what an 18-year-old and their parents think about when they come looking is they're looking at faculty and saying, do they know their stuff? Can they teach it? Will they be a good mentor in the case of a strong faith-based place? How are they going to integrate that? How are they going to integrate faith into what they're doing? And yet a lot of times you go to the faculty profiles first of all, they're hard to find. There are too many clicks down.
Right.
If they're that important, they need to be higher. And then secondly, some of them, I was teasing one of my friends on a campus who's a great faculty member. I mean, tremendous faculty member. And I said to him, your web profile looks like you're a convict, and all they did was take away the sign with your number, your convict number on it. I mean, it's a snapshot of their catalog credentials and an awkward picture. So those web profiles, to me, that would be one of the things I would love to see people work on in cooperation with faculty, colleagues, and the other thing I would say about that too, I don't think academic freedom was intended to mean that everybody can do their own thing with their university faculty profile. I think what you do with your own faculty webpage, love to see that creativity. But this one, I think you want to have some standard stuff in there, like those 4 things I just talked about.
Yeah, I think those 4 things are important. And I think that you also, especially for smaller schools where they are going to be truly mentors, we need to show some kind of their personality. I mean, we don't need a silly video or anything, but we do need to say, what are some of your interests outside of campus? And I think that also helps people relate, and they can put themselves in that campus. I mean, really one of the goals of any kind of marketing is to allow the prospective students and parents to see their child or themselves in that campus, whether that's through the photography that we show, whether that's through the faculty profiles, to be able to say, I can relate to that person. There's just a lot of ways to do that. And so I think we need to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, I agree, Bart. And I think of it this way sometimes too, as a parent of three, all three who have successfully made it through college. Um, it, if I'm thinking about dropping my daughter off at your campus, and I see that your faculty student ratio is 1 to 15, as a parent, I kind of want to know who some of those ones are. What kind of a person is this? If I'm dropping my son or daughter off there for 4 years. So to your point, yes, absolutely. That profile has got to let some of that heart and character and I'd love to see a student or a parent read through that profile, watch a video clip, and go, "Oh man, that's the kind of person I want my child to study with." And wow, there's a bunch of those people there at this place. All right, let's do it.
I agree. Well, just a shout out, Wesley Dean just joined us, and he said hello, Tim and Bart.
Hey, Wesley.
I enjoyed your comment on LinkedIn that it was a personalized purple flare pen that signed his acceptance letter.
Yeah, I don't know if once I left Houghton, because we went through a lot of purple flare pens signing letters, and I think when I left there, I expect their stock may have dropped, at least for they wondered what happened with the blip in the marketplace when the purple pen demand dropped drastically like it did.
Yeah. Well, if you're just joining us, Tim Fuller and I are on. We're just kind of talking about some of the ideas of admissions marketing and admissions work in the midst of the crisis, and kind of chatting about that. If you have any questions, really encourage you to kind of jump on the live chat. I think we've got a few people on now, and if you are listening to this through a recording on later, I encourage you to ask any questions. We can certainly email Tim or I, or LinkedIn and things. And so Wesley said it's all about being personalized. And I think that you're right. I mean, I think the purple flare pen is a good example of that. And, that's one thing, I guess, to talk a little bit about that, Wesley, is the idea of personalization. We've been seeing that in marketing for several years now, is that especially for Generation Z, personalization is really important. But I think that you also have to keep in mind that what some people consider personalization, which is, throwing your name in the middle of an email, or, putting your name on one of those websites that, puts your name up there when you log in. That's not quite the same personalization as sending out a personal, note, a handwritten note, or a personalized video that you actually took the time to do. I think that there's a confusion on personalization, on whether or not it's just, is it just mail merge personalization, or is it true personalization that actually takes some heart and time to do? And I think more prospective students and parents are interested in the ones that take time and heartfelt than they are about some mail merge. And Tim, I don't know what your thoughts about that are, but that's what I have found.
Yeah, I think so. Here's an example of that, Bart. So if you think about the pieces of communication that you get from a college or university, so there's your acceptance letter, there's your financial aid package, and your diploma. Now, obviously, there's your grade reports every semester as well, too. And of course, increasingly, some of those things are not paper you hold in your hand unless you print it out. It's digital. But when you think about the importance of those, so take the acceptance letter, which is what Wesley was referencing there too. For some of the campuses of people who are listening to this, their acceptance letter is it may be personalized, dear Wesley, that way, but everything else is boilerplate. And yet, some of you have essays that you ask students to write. You may have a required interview. You may have other things where they put all this time and energy into this. So how could you do something that personalizes that? And maybe it's the hand signing of the letter. Maybe it's the PS. I mean, I don't know what the recent research suggests, but used to be when there was a PS that was written, especially if it was something personal, boy, did that make a difference. It felt like somebody read my essay, application essay. Somebody actually read that thing.
Yeah.
And responded to it in some way.
I
So
think that's a great example.
yeah, so I think those things. Another example of personalization at this point in time, I heard from a campus leader the other day. They had some of their, while their admission counselors, the folks in the front lines of recruiting, were sort of like the duck on the pond. You know, it looked calm on the surface, but there's a lot of paddling going on underneath. Some of the operations staff had sort of a different level because of urgency, because they weren't trying to greet visitors and, you know, plan campus guest experiences and all that sort of stuff in the same physical way. So they had a little more free time. So what they ended up doing was they had them writing personal notes to people from their region, who may have, based on some of the research that we've been seeing from good folks who've been doing this kind of valuable research. Some students are rethinking their choices and thinking, maybe I'm going to stick a little closer to home.
Yeah.
So this college was putting their operations team to work, hopefully people with legible handwriting, to work on writing some of those personal notes out there. And it's too early to see what kind of return that has, but that's a great example of something that stands out in the middle of the junk that comes in the mailbox. Here's something that, wow, this is different.
Now, if I recall right, Steve Mortland, when he was at Taylor, didn't he write a personalized note to every accepted student? And I mean, he's had tremendous success over the years, and I think that shows that there's some truth in that,
Right.
being able to pay off. I mean, there's value in that.
Yeah. I know a dean of admission who's retired now, but one of the things that he did, and I said, man, how do you do that, Stan? But he did it. He used to call every admitted student.
Yeah.
To tell them that personally. Now, obviously, for some of you, volume-wise,
Right.
you're dean of admission, and you're thinking, well, wait, we got like 3,000 of those people, so it might not be doable.
Right.
But
there's plenty of schools that it would be very achievable to do that.
That's right. That's right. You know, the other thing I'd mention, Bart, while we're on this theme of personalization, is I wrote something for our blog a year or so ago and updated it on what I called the misnomer of the funnel. That this idea that more at the top means more at the bottom. And what we're starting to see, and I'm seeing this in some of the early numbers for an organization where we track their funnel data every couple of months, is I think people are starting to realize really it's not a good thing to have more at the top of the funnel if it's the wrong more. And if we don't have the throughput to get it through. And that's why I'm connecting this to personalization, because I think for a school that used to get 1,500 applications that now gets 4,500 and is enrolling the same number of new students, one of the things you've lost in that translation, in addition to the big check you're writing to whoever's helping you with the top of the funnel thing, one of the things you've lost is the ability to be as personal as you might have been in other times. So is more really better when you've lost the chance to live out part of what your brand might be, which is we're personal, we're caring, you're not a number, but yet we're basically trying to crank through as many applications as possible.
Yeah.
I never thought it would be the case, but I have been saying to some of the campuses where we are, when we look at their funnel data, I think you have too many applications. And, you know, they look at me with the Macaulay Culkin, you know, face at that point in time, but I think it's right.
Yeah. Another question that came up, do you have any tips on how schools are using video to create a connection between faculty and students? Normally these connections would happen on a campus visit, which aren't happening right now. So, I mean, I've heard some campuses, I think you and I worked on one together, Tim, that, you know, they would recruit the faculty to write letters and send out that personalization that way. But have you heard anybody using, you know, having the faculty send out those videos?
Yeah, we're seeing more people back to those faculty profiles, Bart. I think we're seeing some of those increasingly. If you want to see a faculty member's heart and get a sense of them, then a video clip, even a clip of them teaching, might be valuable. But I think in this period of time, in the last couple of weeks, we're now seeing people who are starting to do things like Zoom and others. So it's, and you can't do this necessarily in mass, but if I'm an admission counselor and I know that Rachel's admission decision, choosing us or not, hinges on her perception and her folks' perception that we can get her to the grad school that she really feels like she wants to go to and prepare her for that. So as an admission counselor, I can talk about that. But boy, if I could set up a Zoom with one of my faculty colleagues to make that happen,
Yeah.
and I've got to really carefully set up that faculty member beforehand with here's what is in Rachel's brain, here's what her parents are thinking, set them up for success. And that, yeah, we're starting to see people pull that off. And it's not a thing like that. And you probably can't do it with all however many hundred admits you have.
But you really have to kind of look at the ones that you know that are on the fence that I
That's
mean, you've
right.
got to prioritize the folks that you're going to be doing that to. I think that's a
That's
really
right.
good point.
Yeah.
Speaking of Zoom, I heard of one school that is, so many, going back to more faith-based schools, so many of the traditional undergrad students that are in high school that are traditionally in those youth groups, they're now doing youth groups on Zoom. I know that my church youth group has been doing Zoom meetings, and what they have found, this particular school found, was that they could actually get invited into these Zoom calls and make presentations to these youth groups that they've never had an opportunity to do before, and talk about their college, talk about their school and what they have to offer. Maybe there's some swag that they can offer, a digital download or something. But I thought that was a brilliant way, especially during this time, to really try to look at things that maybe have worked in the past, but how can you, like you said, pivot that into a digital realm that sometimes opens up a lot more opportunities than before.
Yeah, if that's right, Bart, if you're a youth pastor or any sort of youth leader where so much of what you have counted on is the ability for people to be together, and we're going to have this small group go off and do this, and we're going to play this, you may be looking for some additional content.
Right.
I think that maybe the advice to the college in that situation is be really careful about sort of pushing a button and being, blah, here's my institution. I think you got to be careful about how do I enter that space in an appropriate way digitally, recognizing what the purpose of the gathering is and really offer some value.
Right.
And not just a sales pitch in that sense.
Well, and I think that's so true for whether it's whether it's digital or not. We have got to add value to all of our relationships, and it just can't be the next sales pitch and the next, hey, this is the elevator pitch for our school.
Yeah.
We've really got to be able to customize that for each audience that we're a part of.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, we've got a few people online. Any other questions? I'm going to open that up. If you've got other questions, I look forward. I've got the chat window open so that Tim and I can kind of address those. So as we're kind of waiting for some of those questions, kind of talk a little bit about, Tim, I know that you have been traveling a lot before this, and you've been home for 3 or 4 weeks now. How is that affecting, the idea of, I guess, as a consultant, of being able to help people, and I mean, that cannot change what we're doing, but again, we have to change things. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so far I started as an admission counselor in 1980, and so I'm 40 years into a road warrior career. So my wife of 40 plus years has always misses me when I'm gone, and I think she's looking forward to missing me again, even though we're having a great time together. So that's been fun. Yeah, there are different ways. We've had to rework some of the things that we've done, for example, because we can't be physically present on campuses right now. And even if we could, there isn't anybody there for the most part. Or at least the ones who are there are kind of sneaking in and out on a regular basis because they're not supposed to be there. So we've redesigned some of our services to whether it's strategic planning or the initial stages of one of our assessments. There's a lot of that we can do virtually. And so we've redesigned some things that way. Everybody's trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so I know this morning our executive leadership team at Credo, which typically meets every 6 weeks or so, we've been meeting almost weekly. And we were trying to find a time to meet next week for an hour. And our executive team is pretty busy, and the busy is less about internal stuff and more about engage with conversations with clients that are working through some of these same issues and that are thinking about, so when this is over, what are we ready to do? How do we emerge from this stronger, as I think I was saying before. So yeah, I think the idea that, wow, boy, there's nothing we can do. I think there's plenty we can do. My hope from from the consulting side of this, as we come out of this on the other side and say, so do I really need to get on a plane or get in a car every week? Or is there more stuff that could be done virtually? I think some of that is true, but some of that, and maybe this is the old school part of me. It's not the same. It's not the same. You can work and it can be effective. It can be really helpful. I think we're providing people with some great help, especially on how do we close out this fall 2020 cycle well from a recruitment standpoint and the retention standpoint. We've got teams working hard with campuses on that kind of stuff right now. But I think we'll learn things from that, and we'll come out of this better too, better able to help campuses, but eager to get back on campuses.
Yeah, that's for sure. Got another question here from Joe Hetzel. Joe, it's good to see you. It's been a while since we've chatted. He is asking, in this time of uncertainty, how do institutions avoid virtual social fatigue and create an experience that is confident and calming with the right tone? So, we're obviously all kind of getting socially fatigued on this, and, Zoom meetings every day is draining, but how can we make sure that we are using these experiences that we do have so that we come across in our institution as confident with the right tone? I mean, we want to give people as much assurance. And this maybe came up a little bit last week on this chat, was that, we can't, I've met with several presidents who are like, yeah, we don't know if we're going to have classes in the fall. It's like, well, it's a little early to be casting that net out. And I mean, if we don't need to put that out there, let's not put that out there. I mean, let's assume that we're going to be back at full force in the fall. And so I'm kind of like, unless there's a reason to tell them otherwise, I think we just kind of continue the same messaging in the same way. I mean, we're doing it in a different format than we have, but we can't shift things around. I mean, what's your thought?
Yeah, well, a couple things there, Bart. I just saw something. Some of you know our North Carolina office is right near Elon University, and I just saw some of Elon's communication out to their students, faculty, and staff yesterday, and they are all in on, hey, we are a residential campus. I thought their communication was beautifully put. It just says, we can't wait to be back together again. Here's what we're planning to do. Obviously, we're going to keep monitoring the situation, but it's building that expectation that we're going to be back together again. I think, Joe, the other thing I would say in response to that is, when you're creating a virtual experience, and this is the same principle we talk about, by the way, when it comes to a campus visit day or something like that, leave people wishing they could have stayed longer.
Yeah.
So if what we're finding with virtual meetings, for example, is if we normally would have, like some of our strategic planning engagement, for example, begins with a day and a half leadership retreat. Well, nobody wants to do a day and a half virtual thing. Right. So what we're doing is we're breaking that up into bite-sized chunks. So if your visit day normally would have been a 9 to 3 thing, then think about what can we compress in doing from 9 to 11. Right. And how can we create a break and a comeback later, but think smaller chunks. I think make sure that there's always some chance to have some interaction like this would be helpful, but limit the talking heads. You probably don't need the bursar doing a responsive reading of the building policies as part of it. I'm pretty sure that's not there. No offense to bursars, but you probably don't need to assemble all the multitudes that you might for the on-campus experience. Think quality, think hard hitting, think hit themes, and allow people to have a place to go deeper with those later, but don't feel like you have to drag every factoid out.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say, make sure that everything that you're doing is authentic. I've talked to some campuses that are, like we talked about virtual tours, how to make sure that people can still get a sense of the campus. And I talked with one director of admissions this week, and he said, well, we're kind of doing FaceTime with individuals. It's like, if there's a student that never had a chance, but they want to see campus, we're literally taking our phone around and just doing a FaceTime tour. that's a creative way to do it. I mean, it's, it doesn't take a big budget, and you don't have to be really slick to do something. You have to be authentic and say, how can I meet this need? How can I solve this problem with the resources that I have? And I continue to argue with people that this is a more powerful broadcast studio than what you had 10 years ago professionally. I mean,
Right.
you can do a lot more with these smartphones that we have in our pockets than we ever could have before. And so be creative and think through how can you be authentic and solve the problem right now, than wishing that, oh, I wish we would have done a virtual tour last spring. So
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
with the FaceTime tours, love that idea too. I'd say the same thing is true about if you were giving the tour on campus. Show them what they need to see, but not necessarily. And now here's the 17th dorm room that has a slightly different nuance from the.
Right. Yeah, keep it simple. Yeah.
One.
Got another comment here from Kim Hayworth. We are entering the registration day season. Any new ideas out there, given these will be done virtually this year? So again, that's another time that, you're cementing in those accepted, deposited students with registration, and all kinds of fun things happen that day. I mean, that's the, it's one of the days in my own career that I met my wife, on that registration day, and we had met at a scholarship dinner earlier, but that cemented it in a little bit more of my interest in her during that time. But how is that going to be done virtually? I mean, will you have any thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, no, I wish some of my student success colleagues from Cradle were on this call, because they've been doing a lot of thinking about that. I think as much as possible, you want to begin to create some sense of group, because that's a big part of what happens that way. Your current students thinking about coming back, they already have a sense of community that they're eager to get back to. Your new students, some of them, of course, have older brothers and sisters or friends who are there, so they have a sense of that. But for the rest of them, I think you want to create some sense of community in some way that you can. For faith-based institutions, I don't know how it would work to do something virtually from a worship perspective. I think everybody's going to be experimenting, Kim, would be one thing I would say in that regard. But when it comes to things like the registration events, I think as much individual attention as you can do on those days, so that if part of what they would be doing is meeting with a faculty advisor to look at their fall schedule, then can you make sure that happens still, that there is still an opportunity? Now, that may not all happen on that one day.
Right.
Maybe you need to turn that day into new student registration week. And over the course of that week, if I'm a communication major, then I have a chance to meet with that faculty member. I think in the interest of keeping it short, this is where a great partnership between faculty, admissions folks, and the registrar's office could be helpful. If much of the transactional stuff, the guts of the core curriculum, in other words, if that faculty member walks into that appointment with the schedule basically done, ready to be, the cement isn't dry, right, but the schedule is, and we're now talking about a couple of nuances, I think that will help it go faster. It will help the student and their parent, who's probably hovering in the background or sitting right there, feel like, okay, good, somebody's thinking about this. Because remember, they're uncertain, and their uncertainty translates into uncertainty for all of us. So as much as we can make things tangible, certain, and so on, just like right now, if I walked away from one of those events with my schedule, you'd want to make sure that however it's set up, by the end of that day, or that, boom, somebody's hitting the button, and that schedule now lives virtually in their hands. Yeah. So that as quickly as possible, they're getting the intangible made tangible for them.
It's interesting. I'm kind of as many people on this know, and I think, Tim, my second son is going to Purdue in the fall, and I've been kind of watching how they've been addressing him during this time. And if there were some folks on this chat last week from Purdue that were sharing kind of some of the things that they'd been doing. I wish they were on today, because I think that what they're doing, they could speak more succinct to it than what I, as a parent, am experiencing. But he had to go on the other day and register for some of the registration day items. One of the things they had him do was upload one of his senior photos. That's going to be his student ID, because they're not going to be able to take their photos during registration. And he also had to provide some dates that he could meet with his faculty advisor via Zoom so that they could work through, these things. And so I think part of it is what Tim said, is kind of busting the day up, what we historically think of one day. How can we creatively think about how can we achieve these same things on the pace of the student? Because these students are still doing e-learning. They're doing these things with their parents. It's going to be very difficult for them to take an entire day apart to do the traditional 8-9 hours types of things. And so how can you bust it down and still make it personalized and get that sense of community, maybe through an interactive YouTube live or something that you have everybody come in on, but still allow them to do other things at their own pace and at their own time.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I'd add to that, Bart, that occurs to me as we're talking through this is, I think there are also some implications for when the minivans start pulling up and dropping people off in the fall. Normally, what would we have assumed they all would have experienced together that they won't have experienced? Right. So I think it's going to mean some changes for arrival, move-in days, other things like that. Yeah, I don't know if it means you want them to come a day or two earlier so that you can create some of that community building stuff that might have happened earlier. I don't know what the solution is there, but I know smart people on campuses have been thinking about that creatively.
Yeah, because I think that, as we all know, that those first few weeks are going to be the part that then helps with retention.
Right.
And so we've got to make sure that that's a good thing too. So, okay, well, we've got got a few, any other questions? We're kind of coming near the end of our time together. Tim and I have discussed a number of things. If you didn't get a chance earlier, you can watch the recording later, but we've still got a few people online. I will leave it open for any other questions. I guess as we're waiting for any other questions, Tim, any other final thoughts that you would have? We're coming up on 45 minutes. I think that'll be enough for today, but any other thoughts that you might have that you would just kind of throw out there as we kind of are dealing with this time?
Yeah, those of you who know me know that I'm the kid who grew up collecting baseball cards, but spending more time with the numbers on the back than the pictures on the front. And so you'd expect me to talk a little bit about data. And here's my caution about data. Two things. Number one, beware the sample size of one, because I think you're going to get a lot of anecdotes from students, and it'll be easy to jump into sky is falling mode based on one parent or one student. So be really careful about that. And you're not physically present with your teams, so you're going to have to help them with that too. Whether it's the download every morning from what everybody learned the day before, and making sure you're normalizing it. Second thing is, and Bart, you alluded to this earlier, I love all the research that's out there from the various groups that have been talking with high school seniors and their parents about what they're thinking. They're not necessarily talking to your students. So take that as trend data, but don't be sort of deterministic. Oh, there's nothing I can do. I think being personal, closing loops, creating certainty where there is no uncertainty. I think some of you are going to be able to, those are trends. They're trends you got to be thinking about, like the whole, I'm thinking of staying more local. Okay, so how do we act in that regard? But in the meantime, if I'm in Indiana and I've got a great 5 accepted students from the West Coast, I'm not giving up on them either. I'm going to help keep reminding them of why we're a great choice. So the data matters, but beware of sample sizes of one, and also beware of, oh, I saw that art and science survey, and I guess we should just not bother with some of these students further away. Absolutely not. You built great connections with them already. Keep working them.
Right. That's great. That's really good feedback. Well, I'm going to kind of wrap this up. We've been at about 45 minutes. I just appreciate everybody who's been on the live chat. Appreciate too for you who have joined in later on and you're watching this on the channel as a replay. Tim, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for the invite, Bart.
Good to talk, and as we continue to kind of navigate this time, I guess I can speak for Tim and Credo and myself. We are more than happy to have you reach out, have a conversation, and figure out how we can help solve some of these issues. So thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.